Tumsifu Yesu Kristu. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. Asalamu alaikum, mpendwa mtazamaji na mfuatiliaji wa chaneli yetu pendwa na ya nguvu kabisa ya Upashanaji Media. Kumbuka upo nami Uncle Tom Mpanji, mpashanaji wako. Niendelee kukushukuru sana kwa kusubscribe na kubofya kialama cha kengele mbele ya neno subscribe. Lakini vile vile asante kwa kulike na kushare taarifa hii katika magrupu ama mitandao mingine ya kijamii, ili na wengine nao waweze kupata habari njema. Ni kushukuru pia kwa kushare taarifa hii ama vile vile kucomment taarifa hii, na vile vile kuendelea kunifuatilia siku hadi siku, muda hadi muda, ili tuweze kupashana habari njema na hata habari zile za masikitiko, za huzuni, tukishirikishana sote kwa pamoja, na zile habari za kuleta mijadala, kujadiliana na hatimaye kuweza kufikia yale yote kwa sifa na utukufu wake Mwenyezi Mungu. Kuna taarifa ambayo imeleta ni hamsha ama vile watu kuchangamka kidogo kufuatia taarifa ya Baba Mtakatifu Francisco alipokuwa akihutubia umati katika uwanja wa St. Peter. Ni kwamba Baba Mtakatifu alipokuwa akihubiri umati katika uwanja wa St. Peter, kitu ambacho hakikutarajiwa kilivutia umati huo. Mbwa mdogo mnene alitokea bila kutarajia, akimuongoza Baba Mtakatifu Francisco katika hali ya kushangaza iliyowaacha kila mtu akishangaa. Kile kilichoanza kama usumbufu mdogo kiligeuka kuwa wakati wa kufurahisha ambao hakuna mtu ambaye angeweza kutabiri ama kufikiria hivyo. Lakini haikuwa tu kuhusu mbwa, ilikuwa juu ya kile Papa aligundua baadaye: mwitikio wa umati, hali isiyoweza kusaulika. Hii ni hadithi ya huruma, uhusiano na kifungo kisicho cha kawaida kati ya mwanadamu na mnyama. Tazama, wakati ambao haujaandikwa unakuwa ukumbusho thabiti wa upendo katika aina ndogo kabisa ya mnyama. Na mpendwa mtazamaji na mfuatiliaji wa chaneli yetu pendwa na ya nguvu kabisa ya Upashanaji Media, kumbuka upo nami Uncle Tom Mpanji, mpashanaji wako. Nikukumbushe umuhimu wa kusubscribe na kubofya kialama cha kengele mbele ya neno subscribe, kulike na kushare taarifa hii katika mitandao mingine ya kijamii. Ni vema na haki unakuwa umetenda utume huu kindaki bila kujibakiza. Lakini pia heshima yako sana kwa kudondosha komenti yako kufuatia taarifa hii ama kisa hiki cha Baba Mtakatifu Francisco na mbwa mdogo. Na nikuachie uzi huu ufuatilie kwa lugha yetu ya Kiswahili. Karibu.
Pope Francis didn't know that a camera was recording him when a dog came to him and he did something amazing. It was an unusually warm November afternoon in St. Peter's Square. The rhythmic murmur of prayers mingled with the occasional laughter of children playing among the cobblestones, lending the air a rare mix of reverence and joy. Pope Francis, dressed in his simple white cassock, stood at the edge of the central dais, greeting visitors and blessing those who had come to see him. For many, it was a moment of profound spiritual connection, but for the Pope, it was also an opportunity to observe the world as it truly was. His kind eyes scanned the crowd, pausing occasionally on a face or a gesture that moved him. Among the banners and waving hands, he noticed a young boy in a wheelchair smiling up at him, holding a small handmade card. Pope Francis leaned down, his voice gentle, as he accepted the card and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, whispering words of comfort. As the afternoon progressed, a quiet hum of excitement spread through the crowd. It wasn't just the presence of the Pope that drew attention, it was the atmosphere itself. Something felt different that day, as if the square held its breath in anticipation of an unscripted moment. After the final blessing, the Pope began his customary walk along the rope barriers to greet those he hadn't yet met. The Vatican guards flanked him discreetly, their eyes scanning for any disruptions, but even they seemed at ease amidst the serenity of the day. Just as Pope Francis reached the far side of the square, near a cluster of olive trees, he paused. A faint noise caught his attention, a sound that seemed out of place amidst the crowd's cheer. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. He tilted his head, straining to identify it. Was it a whimper? A faint bark? The Pope stepped away from the main pathway, his curious expression drawing murmurs from those nearby. The sound grew clearer as he approached the edge of the colonnade, a soft, high-pitched yelp, almost like a cry for help. "Holy Father, is something wrong?" one of the Vatican guards asked, stepping closer. The Pope raised a hand to reassure him. No, I think I hear... a dog?" "A dog?" the guard repeated, startled. Dogs were not an uncommon sight in Rome, but within the walls of St. Peter's Square, they were a rarity. Guided by the sound, Pope Francis moved closer to a small gap between two columns, where a patch of green shrubbery grew against the ancient stone. The noise became unmistakable now, a series of plaintive whimpers punctuated by occasional silence. Kneeling carefully, the Pope peered into the shrubs, and there, barely visible beneath the leaves, was a tiny, scruffy dog. Its fur was matted, its small frame trembling as it crouched in the dirt. The animal looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, its tail tucked tightly under its body. It was clear that the little dog was lost, or worse, abandoned. The Pope's face softened, his expression filled with both concern and tenderness. "Oh, Piccolo," he murmured, his voice soothing. He extended a hand slowly, careful not to startle the dog. For a moment, the dog hesitated, its body tense with fear. Then, as if sensing the Pope's gentle intentions, it took a hesitant step forward. The crowd had grown quieter now, their attention fixated on this unexpected scene. Some pulled out their phones to capture the moment, while others whispered among themselves, marveling at the Pope's compassion. One of the guards stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene. "Your Holiness, should we—" "Shh," Pope Francis interrupted, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Let him come." The dog inched closer, its tiny paws barely making a sound against the cobblestones. Finally, it reached the Pope's outstretched hand, sniffing cautiously before pressing its damp nose against his palm. "There you are," the Pope said softly, stroking the dog's scruffy head. "What happened to you, my little friend? You look like you've had a hard journey." The dog let out a small whine, as if answering his question. Its tail began to wag faintly, a tentative sign of trust. The Pope chuckled, a warm and hearty sound that seemed to dissolve the tension in the air. Without hesitation, he gently scooped the dog into his arms. It was light. Far too light, he thought. The dog nuzzled into the folds of his cassock, seeking warmth and comfort. As the Pope cradled the tiny animal, he turned to his aides and the guards. "We must find out where it came from. Perhaps it belongs to someone nearby. If not, we'll make sure it's cared for." But even as the moment unfolded, the Pope felt there was more to this encounter than met the eye. The dog, though now calm in his arms, occasionally glanced toward the far end of the square, its ears perking up as if drawn to something unseen. But the thing is that Pope Francis had no idea that a camera was recording him when the dog did something unexpected later that day. Later that afternoon, after the unexpected discovery of the tiny dog, Pope Francis prepared to address a smaller group gathered near the basilica steps. Piccolo had been cleaned and given a small dish of water by one of the Vatican staff. Despite its ordeal, the dog seemed surprisingly energetic and had begun wagging its tail with enthusiasm, much to the delight of those nearby. The Pope, however, had a duty to fulfill. Microphone in one hand, he gestured warmly to the group of seminarians, clergy, and faithful gathered in the square. His voice carried a calm, measured tone as he began his reflections, speaking on themes of kindness and compassion. In life, we often encounter moments where we are called to stop and act with love, even when it is inconvenient or unexpected, he said, glancing briefly at the small dog sitting a few feet away. Piccolo, seemingly aware of the Pope's gaze, tilted its head and perked up its ears as if it understood it was the subject of this reflection. The Pope continued, "These moments remind us of the presence of God in the smallest, humblest." But before he could finish his sentence, there was a sudden burst of movement. Piccolo, as if inspired by the words, darted forward toward the Pope. The little dog leaped onto the low platform where the Pope stood, drawing gasps and laughter from the crowd. The Pope chuckled, lowering his microphone. "Ah, Piccolo, it seems you have something to say as well." But Piccolo wasn't stopping there. The dog went straight for the Pope's cassock, tugging gently at the hem with its teeth. It barked once, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed across the square. The laughter from the crowd grew louder, and some began snapping pictures, eager to capture this unscripted moment. Wait, friend," the Pope said, his voice filled with humor. He crouched down, placing the microphone on the podium so he could hold out his hands. "What are you trying to tell me, little one?" Piccolo barked again, then paused, looking up at the Pope with wide, expressive eyes. Its tail wagged furiously, but there was an undeniable determination in its stance. As if unsatisfied with the Pope's response, the dog jumped up, placing its tiny paws on the Pope's knee, and began whining softly. The Pope, now fully intrigued, leaned in closer. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice lowering as if addressing a child. The dog responded in the most unexpected way. It reached out and pawed at the microphone. The crowd roared with laughter as the Pope, surprised, picked up the microphone and offered it to the dog in jest. "Do you want to speak, Piccolo?" he joked, holding the microphone close to the dog's snout. Piccolo barked sharply into the microphone, the sound amplified across the square. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Children laughed and clapped, and even the Pope himself leaned back, laughing heartily. "Well," he said, straightening up, but still holding the dog, "it seems we have a guest speaker today. Perhaps Piccolo has more wisdom to share than I do." The laughter gradually subsided, but the dog's antics weren't over. Piccolo wriggled in the Pope's arms, signaling that it wanted to be put down. Once back on the ground, it trotted a few steps toward the edge of the platform and looked back at the Pope, barking once more. This time, the bark was not playful, it was insistent. The Pope's expression shifted. The dog's behavior was unusual, almost as if it was trying to communicate something urgent. Piccolo ran a few more steps, stopped, and turned back again, barking repeatedly. "You want me to follow you, don't you?" Pope Francis asked, his voice soft but serious. The crowd watched in silence as the Pope descended the steps, following the small dog. Piccolo led him toward the colonnade where it had been discovered earlier that day. Its small legs moved quickly, its determination unwavering. A Vatican guard stepped forward, hesitant. "Holy Father, do you need assistance?" No, the Pope replied, waving him off with a reassuring smile. "Let us see where Piccolo leads." The crowd, unsure whether to stay or follow, waited in hushed anticipation as the Pope and the dog disappeared behind the columns. The soft echoes of Piccolo's barks grew faint, leaving the gathering in suspense. Behind the colonnade, Pope Francis followed closely as Piccolo stopped near a small, overgrown patch of shrubs. The dog sniffed around frantically, pawing at the ground before barking again. The Pope knelt, gently pushing aside the leaves. What he saw made his breath catch. Nestled in a small hollow beneath the shrubs were 3 tiny puppies, smaller than Piccolo. Their eyes were barely open, and they shivered against the cold earth. Piccolo, the brave little dog, wagged its tail and let out a quiet whimper, nuzzling the pups as if to say, "These are mine. Help them." The Pope's heart swelled. He reached out, carefully gathering the puppies in his hands. Their small bodies trembled in his palms, but they soon stilled, as if sensing the safety of his touch. "You've been leading me to them all along, haven't you?" he whispered to Piccolo, his voice filled with wonder. Piccolo barked softly, circling the Pope as if in gratitude. By the time Pope Francis returned to the square, carrying the puppies with Piccolo at his side, the crowd erupted in applause once again. But the Pope wasn't focused on the spectacle. His thoughts were on the fragile lives he now cradled and the extraordinary instinct of the little dog who had led him to them. At that moment, he realized that Piccolo's interruption wasn't just an amusing distraction. It was a call to action, a reminder of the sacred duty to care for all of God's creatures, no matter how small. The unexpected discovery of the puppies sent waves of emotion through the crowd in St. Peter's Square. As Pope Francis emerged from the colonnade, cradling the tiny, shivering bundles in his hands, a collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Piccolo trotted proudly at his side, tail wagging furiously, as if to announce to the world that a miracle had unfolded. The Pope, his serene face now marked by an unmistakable tenderness, raised one hand slightly to quiet the murmurs of the crowd. "My dear friends," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying a warmth that resonated deeply with those gathered, "we have been reminded today of the smallest among us, those who cannot speak, yet cry out for love, care, and protection." He knelt gently on the platform, laying the fragile puppies in a soft, prepared basket brought by one of the Vatican aides. The puppies nestled together instinctively, their tiny bodies still trembling from the cold. Piccolo circled the basket protectively before sitting beside it, his scruffy little face beaming with a mixture of pride and relief. The Pope reached down and stroked Piccolo's head affectionately. "This little one," he continued, addressing the crowd, "did not need words to show us what compassion truly means. He trusted us to listen, to act, and in doing so, he has reminded us that every life, no matter how small, is precious in the eyes of God." The applause that followed was thunderous. Some in the crowd had tears streaming down their faces, moved by the simplicity and depth of the moment. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders, pointing toward the Pope and the dogs as if to etch the scene into their memories forever. The puppies were quickly taken to the Vatican veterinary team, who provided them with warmth, nourishment, and care.
Naam, sina story nyingi, ni hivyo tu kama ambavyo nimekuletea uzi huo. Nikushukuru sana kwa kuendelea kusubscribe na kubofya kialama cha kengele mbele ya neno subscribe, lakini vile vile maua yako mengi kwa kulike na kushare taarifa hii katika mitandao mingine ya kijamii. Nitaendelea kukushukuru sana tena sana kwa kuendelea kudondosha komenti yako kufuatia kisa hiki. Sina la ziada. Asante na kwaheri.